The skies above the great mountain ranges were no longer blue. Black clouds swirled with unnatural motion, birthed from the exhaust of alien vessels that floated above the peaks like sentinels of death. The HFY had arrived without warning, piercing Earth's defenses within days. Their ships, angular and obsidian, blanketed the summits of the Himalayas, the Rockies, the Andes, anywhere elevation granted power. Their strategy was precise. Control the heights, control the world. Human resistance surged in the first week, but it was crushed with devastating efficiency. Jet fighters disintegrated midair under plasma fire. Tactical drones lost signal before reaching their target. Troops sent into mountain corridors vanished, their last transmissions filled with static and panic. The aliens didn't just dominate, they humiliated Earth's militaries. The message was simple: these peaks belonged to them now. Once the HFY fortified the highlands, they launched their true assault, not with bombs, but with silence. Communication hubs were dismantled. Satellite towers torn from the Earth. In their place, strange black pylons rose, humming with frequencies that bent reality. Civilization below the mountains struggled to function. Cities flickered with irregular power. Aircraft refused to take off. Earth, once a planet of coordination, had been fractured into isolated pockets of helplessness. But the aliens understood more than just technology. They understood psychology. They knew that to win permanently, they had to extinguish the root of resistance, knowledge. And so, they targeted centers of learning. Schools were ordered shut. University campuses were razed, books burned in great pyres on the slopes beneath the ships. Scientists were labeled instigators and detained. The HFY declared that Earth would progress no further. Its future would be curated by the conquerors, not the conquered. Hope became a relic. Families fled the cities, only to be turned back at blockades. Children whispered questions they were no longer allowed to ask. The world's collective memory began to decay, not from fire, but from fear. Those who remembered how things worked, how to code, how to build, how to teach, were hunted like wolves. But not all wolves are easy to catch. Far beyond the scanning beams and patrol paths, nestled deep within a ravine shielded by jagged cliffs and dense fog, there lay a place the HFY couldn't reach. It had no coordinates, no roads. Only whispers. The humans who found it called it Vanta Hollow. To the aliens, it might as well not have existed. It wasn't a city or even a village. It was a sanctuary, small, hidden, alive. The refugees who built it weren't soldiers. They were physicists, engineers, professors, and their families. Men and women who had seen the flames licking their libraries and knew what must be done. They didn't fight with rifles. They brought with them microchips, handwritten journals, salvaged processors, and, most importantly, children. Within the hollow, a quiet war began. Not one of bullets, but of information. By day, the children helped gather water, farm in vertical gardens, and build makeshift solar arrays. But when the stars emerged and the alien eyes turned elsewhere, the real work began. Lessons were whispered beneath canvas tents insulated with moss and foil. Holographic diagrams were projected onto cave walls, using salvaged optics. AI code was scribbled on wooden slates. Each child learned how to assemble circuits, how to think in code, how to listen without speaking. They didn't learn because they were told to, they learned because their lives depended on it. There were no grades, no diplomas. Only purpose. The oldest of them, a 17-year-old named Eshar, once dismantled a downed alien probe using nothing but a multi-tool and memory. He turned it into a makeshift signal jammer. Another, Layla, barely 15, reverse-engineered a burnt-out camera drone to function again, its footage sent to a portable drive buried under her bunk. No adult instructed them step by step. They figured it out through trial, error, and instinct, the inheritance of a species that had survived worse. The HFY called humans soft thoughts. Fragile, reactive, dependent on linear systems and centralized leadership. But here in the hollow, children were becoming something else, adaptive, collective, and dangerously creative. The nights in the valley were cold, but not silent. They buzzed with the quiet hum of prototypes being tested under starlight. Motors spun in the dark. Wings fluttered in the wind, testing lift and silence. Errors were made, and progress was slow. But progress came nonetheless. From the ashes of schools and silence of lost institutions, something new was being forged. Not just resistance. Not just survival. Something the Threxeri had never accounted for. A generation born not from comfort, but from necessity. Raised in shadows, tempered by loss, armed with ideas instead of rage. They didn't pray for salvation. They were building it. Eshar adjusted the voltage on the capacitor bank with steady fingers, his brow furrowed in concentration as the current surged through the circuit. A small drone, cobbled together from scrap and salvaged aloes, hovered momentarily before crashing into a pile of moss. Layla let out a breath of frustration, then pulled the blueprint up again on her cracked tablet. They were close, but not close enough. Behind them, Professor Ilias scribbled corrections on a slate board, his coat threadbare but his eyes sharp. There was no room for failure, only iteration. In Vantahollow, time wasn't measured in days but in breakthroughs. There was no clock, no structure. Tasks were dictated by need and opportunity. The youngest children rewound copper from abandoned transformers. The older ones dismantled malfunctioning solar converters for viable parts. Teaching was fluid. A morning could begin with geometry, break into quantum logic by noon, and shift to stealth dynamics by dusk. No topic was too advanced, no question dismissed. Every concept, however complex, was broken down and made usable. What made the learning profound wasn't the material, it was the motivation. The children weren't preparing for exams. They were preparing for war. Not the kind fought with guns and uniforms, but a war of deception, precision, and infiltration. Their enemies didn't understand the value of human creativity. The Threxeri underestimated not just humanity's resolve, but its capacity to adapt under pressure. Every lesson taught in that valley was aimed at weaponizing that mistake. Eshar's group specialized in flight dynamics. They spent weeks studying bird behavior, analyzing how different species maneuvered through high-altitude drafts, adjusting angles of wing curvature down to half degrees. They used binoculars to track raptors from dawn till dusk, documenting each motion, each dive, each glide. Their objective was not mimicry, it was replication. Machines had to move like life, indistinguishable from it. It was Layla who first proposed switching from gyros to adaptive joint pivots using carbon ligaments sourced from spider silk polymers. Her model not only reduced noise but introduced flexibility during wind turbulence. The prototype soared for 28 seconds before its battery cell gave out. That small flight sent ripples through the camp. It wasn't a breakthrough, it was proof. The dream was no longer abstract. As the drones improved, so did their systems. Cameras harvested from obsolete medical devices were retrofitted with zoom lenses. Noise suppression tech was borrowed from old music equipment. AI modules were built on open-source frameworks once used for translation, now repurposed for real-time terrain analysis. What was once a pile of junk became a hawk-shaped reconnaissance unit with nearly imperceptible heat signatures. But stealth wasn't enough. They needed numbers, and more importantly, they needed independence. The drones had to think, not follow. Professor Ilias worked with the students to develop a rudimentary swarm intelligence matrix. It was crude but functional. Drones could now navigate cooperatively, avoid detection zones, and map enemy towers without a human pilot. Amina, barely 13, was the one who cracked the flocking algorithm after studying migratory starlings. She didn't know it at the time, but her code would change everything. The prototypes were tested at night in the deeper canyons. Every failure was recorded, analyzed, solved. Drones that clipped trees had their wings redesigned. Those with unstable altitude control received new PID tuning. The team worked in cycles of 4 hours on, 2 hours off, long shifts marked not by fatigue, but by obsession. Nobody wanted rest. They wanted results. To keep progress hidden, completed units were stored beneath carved ledges and in hollowed stumps, wired to motion-triggered cloaking nets. The energy needs were met through an underground hydrogenerator that the children had rigged from an old turbine and repurposed ceramic filters. Every watt counted. Every spark was protected. As weeks passed, the number of operational drones grew. A dozen turned to 3 dozen. Then 50. Each carried unique configurations, some with high-definition optics, others equipped with signal interceptors, a few carrying micro-explosives no bigger than a coin. They were named after birds: kite, vulture, shrike, merlin. They didn't look like machines. They looked like nature with purpose. The children weren't just learning science. They were becoming engineers of war under the canopy of exile. What they built wasn't taught in any formal curriculum. It was instinct forged with desperation, creativity honed by pressure. The adults guided, but they did not lead. The young carried the innovation forward. Their success wasn't celebrated with applause, only a quiet nod or a glance of pride. There was no room for ceremony. Every working drone meant another piece of sky was theirs again. Every upgrade brought them one step closer to proving that human intellect, trained, hungry, and unshackled, was the deadliest force the Threxeri would ever face. The first mission was silent, deliberate, and exact. Kite 1 launched just before dawn, gliding between pine trunks without disrupting a single branch. It climbed along the thermal drafts with effortless grace, its polymer feathers adjusting dynamically to wind variation. The Threxeri outpost, built into the cliff wall 2 kilometers away, never detected its approach. From 80 meters out, the drone began its sweep. Its thermal lens picked up the alien patrol rotations, antenna array pulses, and surface vibration patterns. In under 4 minutes, it mapped the entire facility and returned undetected. Back in the hollow, the footage was studied in absolute silence. Not a word was spoken. Every detail mattered: gate timings, motion sensor placements, blind spots between patrol arcs. Within hours, attack vectors were designed. Not for brute force, but disruption. The goal wasn't destruction. It was confusion. Make the aliens question their instruments, their protocols, their instincts. Strike 1 was carried out by 4 drones at sunset. Each mimicked different avian species and flew staggered paths. One dropped an EM disruptor salvaged from old medical gear near the central relay. Another swept across a landing pad, releasing a compound that corroded sensor contacts. The third projected mimic signals designed to spoof alien thermal alerts. The fourth simply hovered nearby and recorded their reaction. What followed wasn't immediate chaos, it was worse. It was uncertainty. The Threxeri couldn't confirm what they saw. They captured fragments of what they assumed were birds. Their scanners flickered, control relays rebooted without explanation, and system logs contradicted each other. They blamed faulty maintenance. Not once did they suspect engineered sabotage. The next operation escalated. This time, 7 drones, each following asynchronous flight paths, attacked 3 surveillance towers simultaneously. One was blinded entirely when a drone deployed reflective mesh across its infrared lens. Another was rendered deaf when high-frequency pulses scrambled its directional microphones. The last tower's AI core was exposed to a pulse signal laced with corrupted Threxeri code recovered from an old crashed scout. It shut down, then rebooted in diagnostic mode for 12 hours, unable to rejoin the network. Within 2 weeks, the mountains became unpredictable territory for the Threxeri. Patrols reported phantom signals, unidentified objects, and sudden sensor dropouts. They filed reports. No patterns were found. No source confirmed. Some began calling the incidents atmospheric anomalies. Others suggested avian interference. None considered the truth, that the sky was no longer theirs. The drones evolved with every mission. All-type units with echo-canceling wing joints operated during night runs. Hummingbird variants zipped between branches, sending back high-resolution images of hidden cables and buried modules. Crow models dropped metallic chaff in strategic spots, redirecting scan pulses and creating false imaging clusters. Each class had a purpose, each flight logged, refined, and redeployed. What made these strikes lethal wasn't the payload. It was the misdirection. Each operation forced the Threxeri to recalibrate, refocus, realign. Their command structure struggled with inconsistencies. Internal reports contradicted what the command hub received. Isolated outposts went dark during drone passes, only to return to normal without apparent interference. Patterns dissolved. Predictability vanished. To respond, the aliens deployed automated sentry drones equipped with wide-spectrum sensors. The birds adapted. Their coatings were modified to scatter radar signals. Wing beats were randomized to avoid acoustic tracking. When one owl drone was captured and disassembled, it self-immolated via micro-core ignition before the Threxeri could extract a single bite. An airspace once dominated by alien precision now belonged to engineered chaos. Every canyon could hide a camera. Every bird might be more than it appeared. The Threxeri found themselves reacting instead of commanding. They lost initiative. Resistance groups beyond the mountains heard of the incursions and reached out through hidden channels. Blueprints were distributed. Dozens of new variants emerged across isolated enclaves. Custom builds began appearing in other regions: jungle-adapted birds in South America, sand-coated kestrels in desert zones, sub-zero hawks over snowbound ridges. The war was no longer confined. The sky had become a decentralized battlefield. Still, no human face appeared. No fighters, no signatures, no names. Only birds. The Threxeri attempted countermeasures, but their protocols were rigid. They programmed responses based on expected tactics, none of which applied. Their systems weren't built to interpret deception on a biological scale. They fought what they could measure. The birds gave them nothing. At high command, Threxeri analysts proposed banning all avian presence near critical infrastructure. Nets were deployed. Sonic repellents installed. Drones programmed to shoot any airborne object exceeding 30 centimeters. They began destroying actual birds. Forests fell silent. But the attacks didn't stop. Because the enemy wasn't natural, it was deliberate, intelligent, and learning faster than they could react. Each bird that soared wasn't just a drone. It was proof that even with their weapons, their ships, and their control of the skies, the Threxeri were no longer the hunters. They had become the hunted. The designs advanced until the line between life and machine ceased to exist. Avian drones were no longer mechanical copies. They became biological illusions. Every component served dual function, structural and deceptive. Feathers made from carbon silk threads bent like real plumage. A newly developed nanopolymer skin adjusted thermal output to mimic body heat. Internal servos were tuned to replicate muscle twitch, slight asymmetries, even tremors caused by wind resistance. Drones could now perch, shift, blink, behaviors indistinguishable from natural counterparts, even under close surveillance. The Threxeri depended on sensory supremacy. Their monitoring grids relied on motion prediction, biosignature classification, and synthetic pattern filters. When the drones entered their airspace, they triggered none of those systems. What registered on scans looked like birds. On visual check, they were birds. Even thermal lenses showed appropriate blood heat dispersion. They were invisible, not by stealth, but by simulation so complete it bypassed suspicion. Soon, false alarms overwhelmed the Threxeri's response network. Every fluttering shadow was flagged. Patrols were rerouted for winged silhouettes. Field agents deployed net cannons at sparrows. Command logs filled with incident tags that led nowhere. Order degraded into uncertainty. Their sensor grid, once flawless, now returned noise. Their algorithms couldn't distinguish signal from decoy. The humans exploited this blindness further. Drones began projecting high-frequency tones that mimicked Threxeri distress signals. Sentinels were drawn into pointless loops, circling harmless trees. Others broadcast encrypted interference pulses at precise intervals, forcing data nodes into diagnostic mode mid-operation. One unit perched above an alien broadcast dish and emitted a low-frequency hum for 17 hours. It triggered 5 separate maintenance calls without revealing its presence. Psychological erosion followed. Commanders began issuing curfews, not to suppress humans, but to reduce drone encounters. Security personnel refused mountaintop rotations. A popular rumor spread among the Threxeri that the planet's wildlife had become self-aware. Superstition replaced strategy. Every unexplained malfunction was now avian interference. Some called it sabotage. Others whispered that Earth itself had learned to fight back. Drones were deployed in pairs now, one active, one passive. While one mapped power grids, the other hovered silently, doing nothing. Its purpose was simple: to be seen. Visibility became a weapon. Dozens of alien officers reported birds that stared for hours from rooftops. One commander removed every window in his outpost, claiming the stares disrupted morale. Another ordered thermal sterilization strikes against entire flocks. They killed nothing but birds. The drones were never where they looked. Visual disruption became standard protocol. Drones reflected sunlight at precise angles, briefly blinding scout drones. Others mimicked mating calls of local birds, drawing attention away from nearby infiltrations. A few used harmonic pulses that caused alien equipment to record static-laced loops. Ghosted footage played over real-time operations. The enemy saw themselves walking into ambushes that hadn't happened yet. The real impact wasn't material, it was internal collapse. The Threxeri's trust in their instruments began to dissolve. When a proximity alert went off, they hesitated. When a sensor pinged, they debated. Each alert brought meetings, recalibrations, delays. Their operational tempo fractured under the weight of invisible pressure. Eventually, the alien leadership deployed a specialist team to study the phenomenon. They brought atmospheric analysts, neurobehaviorists, drone engineers. After 6 weeks, they concluded nothing: no source, no pattern, no origin. Their final recommendation was defensive: reduce activity in affected regions, limit signal transmission, and fortify central nodes. It was the exact response the humans hoped for. By shrinking their footprint, the Threxeri gave up territory. Observation points once guarded became abandoned. Mountainside surveillance rigs fell into silence. Humans began regaining access to ridgelines, peaks, and comms junctions. The drones filled the void. The breaking point came when a swarm of 30 drones hovered in formation above a major relay station. They didn't attack. They simply remained visible. Alien guards locked down the perimeter, initiated threat protocols, and scrambled response craft. But the birds never moved. They lingered until dusk, then dispersed. The aliens found no devices, no damage, no evidence. Just footage of motionless eyes watching them for hours. That night, dozens of personnel requested reassignment. Internal reports cited sustained psychological disruption and loss of spatial confidence. They weren't afraid of being attacked. They were afraid of not knowing when, or if, it would ever happen. Then came the message. Delivered not via captured channel, but through a reprogrammed Threxeri relay drone that returned to base on schedule. On playback, a single sentence repeated in perfect syntax. These mountains belong to the birds, and we taught them how to fly. There was no signature. No human voice. Only silence after the message ended. The Threxeri Command Council issued immediate lockdown protocols. But it was already too late. They had lost the initiative. The skies, once a symbol of dominance, now whispered of something far worse: control without confrontation. Presence without origin. Victory without armies. The first synchronized offensive began without a countdown. Across 5 continents, bird-like drones launched in absolute coordination, guided by decentralized algorithms seeded months in advance. Each swarm had its own target, chosen not for destruction, but for strategic disruption. Communications hubs, data relays, energy towers, all critical, all mapped, all vulnerable. The drones didn't need central command. They knew where to go, what to do, and how to vanish after. In the Himalayas, Falcon-class units disabled a high-altitude signal array by deploying microscopic reflective mesh into its primary feed intake. Across the Andes, Kestrel variants intercepted encrypted command loops and rerouted them to silent loops, causing automated defense towers to enter standby. In northern ranges, Hawk drones released clusters of modified nanites disguised as pollen grains. These particles adhered to critical cooling surfaces, gradually raising internal temperatures until systems shut down autonomously. The Threxeri couldn't find a single point of failure. Their data logs contradicted field observations. Energy spikes appeared in regions with no infrastructure. Patrol drones failed to report anomalies they had clearly recorded. Entire facilities went offline and rebooted as if untouched. Engineers began questioning whether Earth's environment was evolving faster than their instruments could interpret. In response, Alien Command deployed emergency override protocols, but they backfired. Human teams had already intercepted and reverse-engineered those very protocols. The override channels triggered embedded counterroutines in the bird drones, forcing Threxeri systems to isolate themselves from the wider network. In trying to reassert control, the aliens fragmented their own grid. Across the mountain sectors, evacuation orders were issued. The high ground, once considered unassailable, was marked as compromised. Threxeri troopships began extraction cycles, prioritizing equipment over personnel. Strategic withdrawal was framed as tactical repositioning. Internally, it was a retreat under duress. No enemy had been seen. No human units encountered. Just birds that flew too close, stayed too long, and disrupted too much. But one alien warlord refused to leave. Stationed at a command outpost embedded into a granite spine, he ordered a stand. He believed the drones were controlled by hidden operators still residing within the mountain. He sealed the perimeter, deployed full-spectrum sweeps, and armed every available platform. For 2 days, nothing happened. On the third, a swarm of 60 drones appeared at the edge of the cliff, perfectly spaced, silent, unmoving. They didn't engage. They hovered. Watched. The warlord ordered all anti-air batteries to open fire. 59 drones were destroyed. One remained. It didn't dodge. It didn't flee. It simply hovered. The warlord gave no order to retrieve it. Instead, he stared through the reinforced observation panel as the last drone slowly descended onto a perch, folded its wings, and stared back. 4 hours later, internal systems began to shut down one by one. Not from external attack, but from internal lockouts. Doors refused to open. Lights dimmed. Data wiped itself. The final signal received by command was a flatline transmission sent from within the outpost. When human teams entered the location 3 days later, they found no bodies, no wreckage. Only empty corridors and one drone resting atop the central control node, inactive but intact. Its memory was erased. Its purpose fulfilled. Elsewhere, regions once silent now buzzed with reconstruction. Engineers emerged from hidden valleys with gear, blueprints, and purpose. Abandoned infrastructure was salvaged. Relay systems were rebuilt using hybrid tech. Signal towers went up, this time human-owned, powered by solar arrays maintained by automated systems developed by the very children who once studied under moss canopies. Education returned, but not in the old form. Schools became laboratories. Classrooms turned into launch bays. The children who had once memorized equations in the dark now taught others how to build, code, and design. Their tools weren't weapons, they were blueprints for self-sufficiency. Statues were not built for heroes. Instead, falcons crafted from salvaged alloys marked the entrances to every new learning site. Not as memorials, but as reminders. That survival was never guaranteed. That intelligence, when unshackled and focused, could outmatch any empire. The Threxeri never returned to the mountains. Their high command labeled Earth a Category Red Zone, unpredictable, non-compliant, cognitively incompatible. Surveillance ceased. Patrols were diverted. A final analysis concluded that Earth's population possessed an inherent trait too dangerous to control: recursive adaptation under suppression. Above the cliffs, wind carried no more warnings. Only silence. And in that silence, a lone drone glided, its form flawless, its wings steady. It carried no weapons, no message, no target. Its presence alone was enough. A signal to anyone who watched that Earth had changed. Not by conquest, but by creation. Not by force, but by thought. And if anyone ever came again, they would not face armies. They would face minds sharpened in shadow, now unafraid to rise in daylight.